Lamont, FYF Sports Debates. We're going to be back again with another sports video, man. Today, we're going to be doing another player comparison. So I look forward to kind of breaking down these two players. I mean, if you haven't checked out the thumbnail already, so you're probably already familiar with the two players that we're going to be talking about today. Before we really get into the video, make sure you hit the subscription button, hit the notification bell, because again, we're going to be trying to do it. We're going to be trying to put out these player comparison videos a lot more often. Again, as we talk about the great players of today, we love to compare them from the players of the 90s. And we just comparing players in general is just a fun thing to do. So again, if you want to stay notified on these videos, make sure you hit the subscription button, hit the notification bell, because we're going to be dropping these videos all the time. But again, back to the topic on hand. Again, a really big topic today. Over the last, not just today, but over the last few weeks has been the comparison between Stephon Marbury and Steve Nash. Who are the better players? Now, as I do this complete player breakdown, I'm going to be giving you not just my analysis on each player's skill set, but again, also how their skill sets factor into creating or putting together a winning team. Because at the end of the day, when you're playing 5-on-5 basketball, winning and results actually matter. So your performance on the court, along with the outcomes, will be in consideration today. So that's what we're going to be breaking down today with Stephon Marbury and Steve Nash. So again, also we actually had a surprise guest on the show at the last minute. I didn't even know he would be available. He's having some microphone issues right now, but I told him, because we're recording this live, I said, well, we're just going to get you in the show. We're gonna have your video feed going, but until he gets his microphone issues corrected, he's going to be silent. But you guys may all be familiar with him. If you're a fan of Ticket TV, make sure you go subscribe to his channel. Then I'm sure you already know the man, the myth, the legend. We got James Hayes here today, man. James, again, we're just gonna introduce you into the show, man. I know that you're having some microphones, some sound issues right now. Hey, but when we get those sound issues fixed, we're definitely gonna have you in the show, man. We're gonna get your input on this player breakdown that I'm doing. So, again, we're gonna start with the two players, Stephon Marbury and Steve Nash. These are both great players in the NBA. Their games, their style of play were extremely different. Steph Marbury was more of a scoring and attacking guard. He was always coming directly at you, just very relentless. And then when you have Steve Nash, he was more of a floor general. He broke you down systematically. And he was able to understand defenses. He was able to, his greatest attribute was being able to execute the pick and roll at a level that compared to John Stockton. So, being able to thrive in those systems is what able to make Steve Nash great when he played. But really, first thing we're going to do is we're going to break down just the player comparisons on what they've been able to accomplish in the NBA alone. And again, this consideration is not going to take into play what they did in college or what they did overseas. If they played overseas, this is strictly an NBA comparison and how these guys panned out in the NBA. So, obviously I always go to my Land of Basketball. I mean, it's one of the best sites to use when you're trying to make head-to-head comparisons with players, especially if you're looking at stats. But again, when you're using these two players, the eye test will also tell you a lot. If you look at the stats, the stats can be a bit tricky to kind of interpret with these two players. So again, if you haven't done your research, if you haven't watched these two guys play, make sure you go do so. There's a lot of footage on YouTube of these two guys playing and how they were able to be effective within their own teams. So we're going to start with championships. Championships with Steve Nash and Stephon Marbury. Now we both know that Steve Nash came close to getting to a finals a few times, was never able to get over the hump. There was a really questionable Western Conference Finals where Steve Nash was checked into the scoreboard table by Robert Horry, which led to a few of the Phoenix Suns players coming off the bench and not even really stepping onto the court, but some of their Players like Amari Stoudemire and I forget who else, but some of their best players were suspended at a very very vital point in that series, and it actually cost Phoenix the series. So a lot of people feel that that's untimely suspension by the NBA due to the rules in play led to them losing that series. But again, Steve Nash nor Stephon Marbury went to NBA Finals, nor did they win an NBA championship. So they're even right there. We have seasons. Steve Nash outlasted Marbury. He played 18 seasons. Stephon Marbury 13. So with regards to the amount of seasons they played, Steve Nash did play 18 seasons. The first 2 years in the league, Steve Nash was essentially playing behind great guards. Steve Nash's first year in the NBA, he was playing behind Kevin Johnson and Jason Kidd. Obviously, we both know those two players, Hall of Fame caliber guards. They had the lion's share of the minutes. I mean, with Steve Nash being a rookie, I think he was only able to get maybe 10 minutes a game in, but he was fairly effective with 10 minutes of play. His second year, he played with Dallas, but he also sat behind some really, really good veteran guards. He sat behind Hubert Davis, and then he also sat behind Robert Pack. And these are both guards in the prime of their career. Hubert Davis in his 6th year, Robert Pack in his 7th year. So again, when you have guards like that on your team, veteran guards that coaches can rely on night in and out basis, well, again, they're probably going to defer to those two before they go to a second-year point guard and Steve Nash, who at the time hadn't really been able to show what he could do in the NBA. And then with regards to Stephon Marbury, well, he started his career off with a bang. He stepped right into the NBA with the ability to score and to score on great players. Nonetheless, Stephon Marbury's career was cut short due to his own miscomings and bad habits. Bleacher Report came out with a list. They ranked Stephon Marbury as the number 2 all-time worst teammate. Stephon Marbury consistently clashed with coaches. Every coach that he played for, he clashed with. When he was with Minnesota, he clashed with the GMs and coaching staff because he didn't want to play in the shadows of Kevin Garnett. I really thought that pairing with Kevin Garnett could have been a beautiful pairing. I really thought that could have been a beautiful pairing if Stephon Marbury was willing to buy in and just kind of defer. He would have probably had to sacrifice his numbers so that Kevin Garnett could develop more. If they would have, if that would have been a long-term pairing, I really think that team could have went deep. If not to the Western Conference, if not to the finals, if they would have been able to stay together and make that work. Unfortunately, Stephon Marbury just clashed with players and coaches everywhere he went. When he played for the Hall of Fame coach Larry Brown, they never saw eye to eye. Larry Brown was fired with the Knicks. Isaiah Thomas stepped in. Stephon Marbury constantly clashed with Isaiah Thomas. It even came to a point where they almost came to blows. Where Stephon Marbury even threatened to snitch or blackmail Isaiah Thomas for information that I think he knew about Isaiah Thomas. And so when that happened, they decided to indefinitely suspend Stephon Marbury. So his tenure with the Knicks at that point in time had essentially ended. And then I think from there he was traded to the New Jersey Nets. So everywhere Marbury's been, he's had a reputation for being a player who's hard to tolerate, not just from players, but from coaches as well. And even went as far as a player like Quentin Richardson. Quentin Richardson stated about Marbury, he said, "I don't consider him a teammate. He has left all of his teammates everywhere he has played out to dry." Sean Marion was quoted as saying, he basically in a conversation with Marbury stated to him that as long as I get my 20 points a game, I don't care if we win or lose. I'm trying to get paid. So, the way Marbury thought, his selfishness on the court, wanting to play for the numbers and not for the love of the game or not for actually winning, those are some of the things that the stats won't tell. But it definitely showed in the results. And it showed in the results because primarily when he was with New Jersey Nets. When Stephon Marbury played with the New Jersey Nets, the Nets were a good team. Marbury was a good player. He was putting up great numbers. But he was still traded to Phoenix for Jason Kidd. And as soon as Jason Kidd got to the Nets, we know that Jason Kidd was able to lead that Nets team to back-to-back NBA Finals appearances. So again, making a small adjustment like that, trading a great guard for another great guard, taking out bad attributes or intangibles and bringing in good intangibles that come with the player like Jason Kidd, you can see how making that small change, regardless of the coaching staff, regardless of the players, can make a team a championship caliber team just that quick. And so we know Jason Kidd will definitely be a Hall of Fame guard, He will be in the Hall of Fame. And if Marbury would have humbled himself, let go of the attitude, let go of the ego, sacrificed his numbers so that players around him could be better, then maybe we would be having this same conversation about Marbury being in the Hall of Fame, as opposed to saying like players like Steve Nash and Jason Kidd, a lot of the players who replaced Marbury have done. So that explains their season. So Marbury's years in the NBA were cut short because he essentially got blackballed by the NBA towards the end of his career. He became so hard to deal with that no NBA team wanted to sign him. So he ultimately had to finish his career playing basketball in China. And I feel that what he did in China should get him into the Hall of Fame, primarily because he was able to humble himself. And having to go overseas and get out of the NBA is a humbling experience. He was able to change his game. And he wasn't able just to change his game, but he actually went over to China and did a lot of great things for that Chinese community and basketball in China. And so he's definitely a Hall of Famer in China. You know, he's the Michael Jordan of China, essentially. They love him over there. He's built a brand. He's built a business over there. So, again, I appreciate everything that he's done for the game of basketball in China. But, again, when we're just talking about the NBA, Marbury's career in the NBA could essentially be summed up that he was a cancer on almost every team that he played for. And this is well documented from coaches and players alike. So we're going to scroll down. Obviously, with playoff appearances, we got Marbury in the playoff 5 times, Nash in the playoff 12 times. So, again, Nash was, towards the end of his career, he was kind of carried on that Laker team. He was a shell of himself with back injury. But, when he was with Phoenix, he had some great playoffs runs. Ran into the Lakers a few times. He ran into a great Laker team. He ran into a great San Antonio Spurs team. He was never able to get over the hump. But at the end of the day, he definitely has some great playoff runs deep into the playoffs past the Western Conference Finals. With regards to Stephon Marbury, he's been to the playoff 5 times. He hasn't really had a lot of playoff success. One of the main things that I feel hurts Marbury's case as far as getting into the Hall of Fame is his production, his extremely poor production in the playoffs. His numbers significantly dropped in the playoffs, going from 20 points a game to 12 points a game. And all across the board, we see his averages significantly decline in the playoffs. And again, I don't know if the moments was too big. I don't know if teams were able to kind of lock in and guard him a bit differently. However, in the playoffs, and we'll go over his playoff stats and those things later, but as you will see, for whatever reason, Marbury was never able to lead a team when they got into the playoffs. His production just dropped significantly. This differs from Steve Nash. Steve Nash in the playoffs, he was able to increase his numbers. He was able to play better. He was able to at least help his teams get close, not all the way to the finals, but they were close. So, again, I think with regards to playoff performance and making your team better, helping your team excel in the playoffs, Nash wins out right there. When we talk about All-Star game appearances, again, Marbury did not do himself any favors on any team that he played for. Because he was such a cancer to most teams, he was not going to get any favors from voters as far as getting into the All-Star game. If he wasn't voted in as an All-Star starter, then he was probably not going to get voted in by coaches, primarily because of his reputation within the league as being an extremely hard to deal with player. He was skilled, but as a teammate, he was terrible. With regards to Steve Nash, we saw Steve Nash start his career off slow. As I said before, he started his career off playing behind great guards, and he kind of had to take time to develop into the player that he was. But over the course of an 8-year period, as you can see here, he was able to make 8 All-Star games. So by making those 8 All-Star games, battling through back injuries, what we can find with Steve Nash is that consistency, year in and year out production, being able to produce at an All-Star level. And again, being able to produce at an All-Star level, not just playing good, but also helping his team excel as well. So that's where we really want to look at these things. And again, everything we talk about today, every aspect that we talk about these players, when we talk about numbers, also consider the outcomes that come with that number. Because in the NBA, it's not a one-on-one game. It's not a head-to-head game. It's a 5-on-5 game. It's about what you can do yourself, but it's also, especially as a point guard, especially as a floor general, you have the most responsibility on the court. It's your job to make everyone better. It's your job to jumpstart the offense. And again, Nash excelled at that. Nash excelled at making players great around him, along with himself. Marbury, unfortunately, again, had a reputation of being extremely selfish. As Shawn Marion stated, Marbury basically wanted to play for his stats. He stated, as long as I can get my 20, I don't care if we win or lose. I'm just trying to get paid. And it's unfortunate in the NBA, especially in the 2000s, that you have a lot of NBA players that feel that way. You have a lot of NBA players that are no longer playing for the love of the game. You have a lot of guys simply playing just to get paid. And it's unfortunate. But you can always expose those players because it will be revealed in the results. It will be revealed in the results. The players that are chasing a check or the players that are actually playing the game to be great. And there's a big difference. So we're going to scroll down to some more stats. Now we're talking about honors and awards. Now, when we talk about honors and awards in the NBA typically come with team success. If your team's succeeding, if you're the best player on your team, then you typically will find yourself winning honors and awards in the NBA. Because again, I feel like the NBA rewards players who, one, change the game, and two, help their teams excel. So when we look at season MVPs, we got Marbury with no MVPs. We got Nash with 2 MVPs. Now, a lot of people will try to make the argument that Steve Nash was not deserving of those MVPs. But one thing that's been consistent with MVP voting over the years is that whenever a player introduces something new to the game, something that we haven't seen before, and they're able to help their teams excel, especially in the regular season, because the MVP is a regular season award, then those are the players that typically win this award. So even when we go back to Charles Barkley winning the MVP over Jordan, again, Charles Barkley started to change the game with his style of play. When we look at when Karl Malone won the MVP over Jordan, when we look at when David Robinson won the MVP over Hakeem Olajuwon, when we look at when Derrick Rose won the MVP over LeBron James, we can go down the line in history and we can look at a lot of MVP winners and make the case for others during those seasons. But at the end of the day, over that 2-year stretch, during Nash's 2 MVP seasons, he was the most impactful player for his team in the NBA. And a lot of people will deny it. A lot of people will say, well, Kobe averaged 35 one of those years. Yeah, Kobe did average 35. But you know what? One thing that we were used to seeing Kobe score 35 a game. It wasn't something new. And again, Steve Nash brought a new element of basketball into the game. He was able to not just accentuate the pick and roll, but he was actually able to revive the NBA, make it fun to watch, playing a faster style of play, throwing the lobs to Amari Stoudemire, kicking it out for a lot of threes to his three-point shooters. They made NBA basketball fun to watch again. All right, because there was a stretch in the early 2000s where ratings significantly declined for the NBA, and the NBA was desperately seeking a team like the Phoenix Suns, that was extremely entertaining to watch. Played fast, played fun, and they played loose under Mike D'Antoni's system. And so I think some of this reward was primarily due to how he excelled in not just making his team better, but changing the game of basketball. And again, he was definitely deserving those awards. So when it comes to season MVPs, obviously Steve Nash wins out there. When we look at All-NBA First Team, well, Marbury was never able to make an All-NBA First Team. Again, I feel like to make an All-NBA First Team, you have to be able to help your team excel, get over the hump. All right, just get to the Western Conference. Keep your team in contention. Don't be a perennial loser. Nash, at his peak, was able to keep his teams competitive. Now, again, Nash played in a really, really good Western Conference with Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. It was going to be tough for any great player in the West to get out of the West because, he had, 3 of the top 15 players in NBA history all time in his conference. So, again, Nash was still able to help his team excel during that era, playing with great teams around him. And he was deserving of those All-NBA first teams because there was a stretch in the NBA where Nash was the best point guard in the league. With regards to just all NBA team selections, now we do see that Stephon Marbury did make either a second or third All-NBA team. So Nash has done that, made All-NBA teams 7 times in his career, Marbury only 2. But again, that can be attributed to Stephon Marbury's outcomes. His outcomes were never as good as Nash's outcomes, which then leads me to question how effective were your stats? Were they really that effective, or were you essentially stat padding? That's a really good question to ask yourself. Now, being a great point guard means being a great passer, being a great floor general. Steve Nash led the league in assists for 5 years. All right, and now we can say that's D'Antoni's system. But at the end of the day, you still have to be a floor general. You still have to execute the offense, and you still have to be great in your role. And his role was to be a great floor general, and he excelled at it. Nash led the league in assists 5 times. Marbury has never done it. So with regards to passing, being a great playmaker, Steve Nash is clearly by far. And this is just not with the stats. With the eye test will tell you that Steve Nash was a far superior floor general and playmaker to Stephon Marbury. Now we're going to go to NBA regular season. I love looking at these stats right here. So, and then again, this is over the course of a career. Stephon Marbury, great scorer. You cannot take that away from him. Great scorer. He was a relentless attacker. That's how I would describe his game. He averaged 19.3 points a game over his 13-year career. And for the most part of his career, for the majority of his career, I think he averaged around 20 points a game. Which, again, that's a spectacular accomplishment in and of itself. A lot of NBA players struggle to do that for just a stretch of a few years. Marbury was able to maintain that for a 13-year stretch. So he definitely was the better scorer. And again, the stats won't tell you that. The eye test will tell you that. As far as just scoring the ball, getting buckets, Stephon Marbury was the superior scorer to Steve Nash. Now, Steve Nash wasn't a pushover himself on offense. He's going to go down as one of the best shooters in NBA history with regards to shooting a 3-ball, shooting a really high 2-point field goal percentage, shooting at 90% clip at free throw line. Steve Nash will go down as one of the best shooters in NBA history, which is what made him so effective in the pick and roll, because he was able to shoot the ball, which when you're able to shoot the ball off a pick and roll, that opens the court up for players like Sean Marion, Amari Stoudemire, Joe Johnson. These guys were all able to excel because Nash, because of his ability to shoot the ball, was able to space the court. And again, I think this is why he excelled the most in D'Antoni's system, because of his skill sets. But as a sheer scorer, we give that to Marbury. Now, rebounds a game, they're both point guards. They both average 3 rebounds a game. Again, they weren't asked to do that much, especially in D'Antoni's system where he assigns all guards to get back. He doesn't even allow his guards to go crash in for rebounds. So again, the likelihood that guards under a D'Antoni system will rebound at a high clip, again, that will be extremely rare. Now, when we talk assists per game, Marbury was still, 7.6 assists a game for a career is a really good number. Nash averaged 8.5 for his career. But again, we know that at his peak, when Nash was at his peak, he was easily the best passer in the NBA over a long stretch of time, where I don't think there was any particular year where we could say Stephon Marbury was the best passer in the game. Again, he was never really known for his playmaking ability, although he could playmake. But like I said, to average 7 assists a game with 20 points, again, a great accomplishment. But again, how effective were these numbers is hard to say with Stephon Marbury because his teams consistently struggle not just to be competitive, but his team struggled to get into the playoffs year in and year out basis with him at the helm. Defensively, obviously, Nash was a liability defensively. Mike D'Antoni's teams, they don't really have very, very strong defensive principles or mindsets. So obviously, potentially could Steve Nash have been a better defender with a different coach? Maybe, but with the results that we have here, and again, even the steals numbers don't account for this. Stephon Marbury was a bit more aggressive on the defensive end, at least as far as playing passing lanes. His on-ball defense wasn't extremely tenacious. It was serviceable because he was a competitor, but again, Steve Nash has the edge slightly on defense. Blocks per game, again, that's an irrelevant stat for guards, but they both ended their careers with 0.1 blocks per game. Now, again, totals. Again, I don't really like to consider totals, even though we will go over totals. I don't like to consider totals because of Nash's longevity. Nash was able to play in the NBA for 18 years. Marbury was only able to play 13 years. Now, Nash, when he started off his career, his first 3 years, he was playing behind great players. And then towards the end of his career, I would say the last 4 to 5 years, it was riddled with back injuries. He never found consistency. When he was traded to the Lakers or when he signed with the Lakers, everyone thought that he was going to have this resurgent. He was never able to bounce back and get healthy. The back injuries just kind of overcame, and that's what essentially forced him out of the NBA. So, again, I like to consider Nash's best 13 years versus Marbury's best 10 years or so. That would be the best comparison, especially when you're just looking at the outcomes of what they did in the NBA. But even in that median type of comparison, Steve Nash far excels over Stephon Marbury. So again, when we look at rebounds, when we look at assists right here, Steve Nash, and again, this is where the deception can trick you. Above, we saw that Marbury averaged 7.6 assists a game. Nash averaged 8.5. Those look like close numbers, but when we look at the totals, we see Nash has close to more than 4,000 assists than Stephon Marbury. So this just shows what type of floor general Steve Nash was. He was always looking to pass. He was always looking to make his teammates better. Excuse me. And again, the outcomes show that what Steve Nash was able to do with his teams with regards to being a floor general, moving the ball, being able to score at 3 levels, was a bit more effective on the court than what Stephon Marbury was doing. Again, steals, we have our steals here, which again, both these defenders, Stephon Marbury was a bit more serviceable, but neither one was a really great defenders. They accumulated some steal totals, but again, that doesn't really detail the type of defenders that they were. They both were below average, I would say, with Stephon Marbury being a slightly better defender. And then with total games, is another irrelevant stat because Steve Nash played 18 years in the league. Stephon Marbury was blackballed after 13 years. Now, when we look at field goal percentages, and I like field goal percentages as a guard, and another reason why I like these field goal percentages because it tells your effectiveness on the court. Now, Marbury did not shoot as many jumpers as Steve Nash. Marbury would attack the basket extremely tenacious, but although he took shots closer to the basket and he wasn't necessarily a strong three-point shooter, he ended his career with a lower field goal percentage. And again, we know Stephon Marbury was a volume shooter, a volume scorer at point guard. And whenever you're a volume shooter or volume scorer at point guard, that means you can't be a floor general, which is one of the primary reasons why I feel that none of his teams could excel or be great. So we see Stephon Marbury has a 43% field goal percentage, while Steve Nash ends his career at almost 50% field goal percentage at 49%, which is really, really good for a guard. Now with three-point percentage, Stephon Marbury 32%. That's okay. It's kind of low. Could have been better if he would have worked on his game a little bit more. But 32%, again, for a guard, especially a scoring guard, In the 2000s, that's not very good. Steve Nash, 42%, which is actually a great field goal percentage from the three-point line. Free throw percentage, Stephon Marbury, 78. And then obviously we know Nash was the more elite free throw shooter at 90%, one of the best in NBA history. So with regards to field goal percentages, this is going to detail your offensive efficiency. So the percentages tell us that Nash was a far more efficient offensive player than Stephon Marbury. Now again, Stephon Marbury scored more. A lot of times it wasn't very efficient because he shot the ball extremely high amount of times at a high volume. He was a ball dominant guard. He was able to accumulate 7 assists a game, but he shot at a high volume, which again was a detriment to many of the teams that he played on. And again, the best example that I can use is when he played for the New Jersey Nets. Ball dominant, high volume shooter. He put up great stats, but the team that the Nets were trying to build at the time, they were trying to build a championship caliber team, and he wasn't making the players around him better, which is why they traded for a floor general, a playmaking guard in Jason Kidd. And we see what happened as soon as Jason Kidd got there. The New Jersey Nets became title contenders. 2 years in a row they made it to the finals, which again, that's an accomplishment in and of itself with the talent that was down there in New Jersey. All right, so now we're just going to look at their best seasons. Now we know that in Nash's best season in 2006, in their best season, this is one Nash's MVP year. Nash's MVP year. Now Stephon Marbury's best year was at 23.9 points per game. Again, really, really, really good numbers, man. Really good number to put up. Again, it always came at the expense of wins. Regardless, if teams win or lose, Stephon Marbury was out to get his numbers. And sometimes when you're playing the game of basketball, it's about thinking your way through it. It's about thinking your way through it. It's like a chess match. Do I need to score every time? When I play this game, do I need to be looking to exploit this matchup over here because he has a better matchup? Do I need to look to isolate this side of the court more because our post player has a better matchup here? Steve Nash was exceptional at being able to understand defenses and understand how to use D'Antoni's offense to break down certain matchups. This is one of the reasons why we were able to see Sean Marion excel, because they were able to feature him in some games. Same thing with Amari Stoudemire. Same thing with Quentin Richardson, and all of these players who were able to have great years in Phoenix with Steve Nash at the helm. This is the reason why. And with regards to Stephon Marbury, he was paired with one of the greatest power forwards of all time, Kevin Garnett, who's now a Hall of Famer. Stephon Marbury, as opposed to playing that game of chess, finding out what he could sacrifice to make the team better, because in his situation, making the team better would mean helping Kevin Garnett be great, which he turned out to be great. And if they could both be great and they could both find ways to be great, then that's the making of a great team. Stephon Marbury never understood that. He never understood that in the NBA. He never was willing to accept Kevin Garnett on that team, and he wanted out of Minnesota. So again, Stephon Marbury was essentially a detriment to his own career because of that, but the stats also show that as well. So again, great scoring year, but Nash's best scoring year, a few less points, 5 less points, but he was able to be so impactful that he won the MVP. And there were guys like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James right in the running. I think it was the 2006 year where Kobe averaged 35 points a game. Kobe was putting up massive numbers that game. But whose numbers were more impactful? If we look at the records, Kobe's team was just a little above 500. Even though he was averaging 35 games, Kobe was doing what he needed to do. Steve Nash led Phoenix to one of the best records in the Western Conference. So I feel like Steve Nash's numbers were just a bit more impactful, although Kobe did have an extremely great year. All right, so now we're going to go to playoff stats. And what I tell you here is, when with playoff stats, I feel like playoff basketball is the end-all, be-all in NBA. This is what matters most. How you perform when it matters most. How do you perform in the playoffs? And my biggest knock My biggest knock against Stephon Marbury is that when it mattered most, he shrunk in playoff basketball. For whatever reason, he just disappeared. Stephon Marbury, 12.6 points per game in the playoffs. Now, we saw his ability to score in the regular season where he averaged on a year-in, year-out basis 20 points a game. His best scoring season was 23 points a game. So we know he's an absolute scorer. Now, but when you're in a 7-game series against a team, teams can now game plan against you. Game plan against you specifically, and if your game is easy to stop, then a good playoff level teams will find a way to constrict or control what you do. And on multiple occasions, as you can see here, Stephon Marbury did not excel at all. 12 points a game, that's not Hall of Fame numbers. It's below par for a starting point guard in the NBA. And if we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame, then we have to take this into consideration. It's one of the reasons why his teams never were able to excel in the playoffs. Rebounds a game, again, that's a wash. Even though Steve Nash averaged 1 more rebound, not really a big deal. With regards to assists, Steve Nash doubled his assist totals, while we see Stephon Marbury's assist numbers significantly, again, dropped in the playoffs for whatever reason. Steals per game essentially the same, and blocks per game essentially the same. So when it mattered most in the playoff, not only do we see Steve Nash's numbers go up compared to what he did in the regular season, what we see here is we see Stephon Marbury's numbers decline. All right. Now, regardless of the competition, again, it's playoff basketball. You got to go out there and do what you got to do. And again, he said he was out there chasing 20 points a game. He could have just done that in the playoffs. Because they needed him. What they didn't need was 12 points a game and 4 assists from a starting point guard in the NBA. So again, we'll pass over total stats in the playoffs. Again, that's irrelevant because we know Steve Nash played far more playoff games, and he increased his level of productivity in the playoffs. So that's not really a close competition. So we really don't need to discuss that. Obviously, percentages in the playoffs, and again, this is really striking. Now, and again, this tells it all. A lot of people would probably say, well, Marbury's numbers decreased in the playoffs because he was looking to pass the ball more. His numbers actually decreased because of what we see right here. In the playoffs, Marbury shot 35% from the field. Extremely low percentage for an all-star level guard. In the playoffs, he shot 27% from the three-point line. In the playoffs, when it matters most, he shot a terrible percentage. And also in the playoffs, his free throw percentage also dropped as well to 75%. So we're looking at all field goal percentages, all of his effectives. This all determines how effective he was in the playoffs. All of his percentages declined in the playoffs. That's not an indicator of a Hall of Fame or a great player. Typically, great players, and when we're talking about Hall of Fame level players, usually increase their productivity in the playoffs. We did not see that with Stephon Marbury. We saw not just a small decline, we saw a significant decline that had very high impact on his team's ability to succeed in the playoffs. Now, when we look at Steve Nash's numbers essentially stayed the same. The playoffs, not only did he have an uptick in scoring, so he shot more and he passed the ball more, but his percentages did not budge. He shot 47% from the field, 40% from the three-point line, and 90% from the free throw line. Again, extremely great numbers. And it shows is consistency over the course of all of the playoffs that Steve Nash participated in. He was extremely consistent. All right. Now, we're not going to say that Stephon Marbury was a complete bust in every playoffs that he participated in. His best playoffs performance was in 2003, where he averaged 22 points a game. All right, and that's actually a really, really good number. But again, did his team excel? Did they get to the Eastern Conference Finals? Did they fold? Again, Stephon Marbury was not known to even be able to help his team get to Eastern Conference Finals, let alone an NBA Finals. Steve Nash, 23.9 points per game was his best playoff in 2005. I think that was another MVP season. But again, in the playoffs, what we see with Steve Nash in the playoffs is in his best playoff, his numbers went up significantly. And again, we're talking about one playoff series. This was Stephon Marbury's best playoff performance in 2003. All right, we see Steve Nash in 2005 increase his scoring to 23.9 points per game. All right, even though he's the floor general, we see Steve Nash increase his rebounding, when he's in the playoffs, in his best playoff performance. We see Steve Nash in 2007 go for 13.3 points a game. He's increasing his regular season averages when he's in the playoffs. So again, what we see across the board. So when we look at all of these stats, as we scroll through all of these stats and we're comparing Stephon Marbury and Steve Nash, what we see is during the regular season, Steve Nash was able to help his team excel and win far more than Stephon Marbury. We see Steve Nash have a positive impact on the players around him. Steve Nash helped a lot of players excel in Phoenix. When we look at Goran Dragic, when we look at Amari Stoudemire, when we look at Sean Marion, when we look at Joe Johnson, we look at a lot of players who were able to excel and build really good NBA careers when they started their careers off playing with Steve Nash. So again, Steve Nash has shown the ability to win. He's shown the ability to make others better. And he's shown the ability to actually be a good floor general, be a great point guard, and not be a detriment to his team. As we said before, again, with regards to Stephon Marbury, his entire NBA career, he was known for being a problem child. Every team that he was on. So, the naysayers will say, well, it was this coach. It was that. No, every single coach that Stephon Marbury played for, he had a problem with. When you have great coaches like Larry Brown and you clash with Larry Brown, not just clash with Larry Brown in the regular season, but he also clashed with Larry Brown in the 2004 Olympics, where he was termed as a cancer to that team as well. And we all saw the miscomings and the shortcomings of that Olympic team as well over in Greece. So it seems like the consistent theme with Stephon Marbury across his entire career is that every team that he's a part of becomes cancerous. All right, it can't succeed, it can't win, and again, it came to a head when he was in New York, and he clashed with the then coach Isaiah Thomas, and he was suspended, not just from the team, he was suspended from even coming to the facility to practice, and he was indefinitely suspended until they can figure out what to do with him. So when you have problems like that on the court, when you have players coming out to state that you essentially gave up on your team, you didn't care about your teammates. When you have players like Sean Marion quote you as saying that you only played for your stats, you didn't care if you guys win or lose, you're only trying to get paid. Those things show, and they actually showed in the results. So it's unfortunate that Marbury's career was kind of hand-tied by his own personal problems. But unfortunately, what could have been a very, very good NBA career was cut short because of his own personal issues. And whatever those issues were, I know, there were a few articles of Marbury stated towards the end of his career in the NBA, he was a bit suicidal. He was going through depression. I'm not for sure what was going on in his mind, what was going on with him personally during his time in the NBA. Whatever was going on, though, it led to a very selfish career. He came in with a lot of promise out of Georgia Tech, and because of that selfish mindset, it definitely decreased his chances of getting into the Hall of Fame. Again, it really shouldn't even be a question. Stephon Marbury getting into the Hall of Fame shouldn't even be a question. But when the Hall of Fame voters actually go to sit down and look at his career in its entirety, what he did in the NBA, how cancerous he was on multiple teams, will play a factor. Now, again, will they say he was a great scorer? Yes. Will they say he was a great winner? No. And again, we're not talking about the one-on-one Hall of Fame. Stephon Marbury would definitely get into the one-on-one Hall of Fame. But when we're talking about the NBA Hall of Fame, we're talking about the Basketball Hall of Fame, We're talking about what you did to help your team excel. Just time and time again, from team to team, Stephon Marbury failed time and time again. And that's not just my personal opinion. The numbers show that. Quotes from his teammates said that. Quotes from his coaches state that. The fact that he was indefinitely suspended from his team, not even allowed to practice with his team, said that. So again, throughout his NBA career, I don't think he did enough that would amount to the Hall of Fame. I think he was able to save his career over in China, and he redeemed himself a bit by a lot of the things that he did for basketball in China. And we know that the NBA respects China with regards to basketball, especially with the NBA in China program. And so I think what he did in China will probably be impactful enough on his basketball career in an entirety to get him in. But in regards to comparing this man to Steve Nash was the far superior player. Steve Nash had better basketball IQ. Steve Nash knew what it took to win. Steve Nash knew how to lead a team. And it ultimately showed in the results, not just winning, but in accolades and having successful seasons in the NBA. So doesn't look like James Mike was able to get fixed. He just sent me a text. He was saying that I need to have him back on the show, so because he says he wants to debunk a lot. He says he wants to talk about their head-to-head matchups. I'm not for sure what head-to-head matchups necessarily between Steve Nash and Stephon Marbury have to do with this, because again, we're talking about their careers. But I mean, again, if he wants to sit down and if he wants to talk about their head-to-head matchups, the few times they matched up, that's fine. We can talk about that. But like I said, at the end of the day, the NBA is results oriented. A lot of the awards and accolades and the successes that you have in the NBA are based on how effective they are. All right, so we've seen a lot of great players, and I'll give you an example. A lot of great players like Mitch Richmond. Imagine if a player like Mitch Richmond is able to win one or two championships. Imagine players like Latrell Sprewell. If a guy like Latrell Sprewell was able to lead that New York Knicks team to a championship, instead of being a cancerous teammate. Imagine if some of these players were able to kind of excel and get over themselves, as opposed to, being so selfish and being such bad teammates. Again, we will look at these guys a lot different. So unfortunately for Stephon Marbury, a lot of the things that he did on the court with regards to his teammates, his selfishness on the court, not caring about winning and losing, that in my mind puts Steve Nash far above Stephon Marbury as the better basketball player overall. And again, if you agree with that premise, let me know in the comments. If you don't agree with it, hit me up in the comments and let me know why. And again, but you got to come with more than just stats, because we've already broken the stats down. All right, we need everything to be outcome based, because that's what the NBA is about. It's about the outcomes. Marbury's had great teams. Steve Nash has had great teams. Marbury had the opportunity to play with D'Antoni. All right, and a lot of people, before we say, I know Ticket TV had said that Stephon Marbury only played a few games with D'Antoni. That's true. But if we go back and do the research on that particular issue, the second or third game of that season, Mike D'Antoni went to Donnie Walsh and said, I want to bring Marbury back. He's a great talent. I think I can give him a role in the system where he can excel. Mike D'Antoni approached Marbury and said, I want to bring you back into this system. We can sit down. We can talk about how your game will translate into this offense, and we can do it your way. Stephon Marbury refused to return. All right, that's the year we saw Chris Duhon have to step in, and Duhon actually had one of the best years of his NBA career out of Duke University. So again, it's another example of how Stephon Marbury was a detriment to his own career. If he would have put his ego to the side and said, you know what, it's time for me to get back on the court. It's time for me to show up and be there for my teammates. If he would have stepped up, put his ego to the side and played that year, well, let's imagine what a player like Stephon Marbury could have done in a Mike D'Antoni system compared to what Steve Nash did. But we can't make that comparison now because it was Stephon Marbury himself who refused to come back and play for Mike D'Antoni after Mike D'Antoni reached out to him and said that they were willing to work with him to implement his game and his style of play into the offense. So again, these are just things you always want to look at. You always want to look up. And again, it definitely plays a huge role in who the better player is, who the better teammate is, and who the better winner is. But again, like I said, let us know in the comments what you think. If you have some other facts that you want to put on this matter, if you want to come onto the show, just put it in the comments. Drop your email in the comments. Let me know. We can get you on the show to discuss it. All right, but again, it's been a really, really good episode. I'm going to try to keep coming with these player comparisons. I really like doing these, breaking these players down like this. And again, we're just going to keep these videos coming as soon as possible, as fast as possible, and as much as possible. But again, it's been FYF Sports, man. Another great player comparison video between Stephon Marbury and Steve Nash. Make sure you like and comment and subscribe.